They said she was a murderer. They tied her to a post in the town square like an animal, bruised and beaten, waiting for judgment that had already been passed. The sheriff stood there with a twisted grin, offering her up like livestock. Choose any woman you want. Most men looked away in disgust or shame, but Jonas Kincaid stood frozen, not because of the woman's supposed crimes, but because his 5-year-old twin daughters were pulling at his coat, their small voices trembling with certainty. Papa, that's her. In that moment, everything he thought he knew about justice shattered. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The dust hung thick in the air that afternoon, the kind that coated your throat and made every breath taste like desperation. Jonas Kincaid had come to town for supplies, nothing more. Horse feed, nails, maybe some peppermints for Elsie and Ivy if they behaved themselves at the general store. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, the kind that blurred into all the others on his quiet ranch outside Willow Bend. But the moment he turned his wagon onto Main Street, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. The crowd had gathered in the square like vultures circling carrion. Men, women, even children pressed together in a tight semicircle, their voices rising and falling in waves of judgment and excitement. Jonas felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen crowds like this before, back during the war, before trials that weren't really trials at all, before executions that were more about entertainment than justice. Papa, what's happening? Elsie whispered from beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve. Ivy, always the braver of the two, stood up in the wagon bed to see better. There's people tied up, Papa. Why are they tied up? Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of the square, his jaw clenching. Stay here. Both of you. Don't move. But even as he said it, he knew they wouldn't listen. The girls were too curious, too innocent to understand what cruelty looked like when it dressed itself up as law. He climbed down from the wagon, his boots hitting the packed earth with a dull thud. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, recognizing him, the quiet horse breeder who kept to himself, who'd lost his wife 2 years ago and raised his daughters alone. People respected Jonas Kincaid's silence, mistook his grief for strength. They nodded at him as he passed, as if inviting him to join whatever spectacle was unfolding. And then he saw them, 3 women tied to posts in the center of the square. Their hands were bound behind them, ropes cutting into their wrists. Their dresses were torn and dirty, their hair wild. One woman, elderly and frail, kept her eyes closed as if praying. Another, younger, sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking with each breath. But it was the third woman who caught Jonas's attention, caught everyone's attention, really. She stood perfectly still. Dark hair fell in tangled waves around her face, and even from a distance Jonas could see the bruises, purple and yellow shadows along her jaw, a split lip that had barely begun to heal, dried blood crusted at her temple. But her eyes? Her eyes burned with something that wasn't fear. It was rage. Pure, undiluted fury that seemed to dare the crowd to look away first. She didn't flinch when people shouted at her, didn't cry when someone threw a clod of dirt that struck her shoulder. She just stood there, chin raised, staring down the entire town with a defiance that made Jonas's chest ache with something he couldn't name. Attention! Attention! Sheriff Rogan Hale's voice boomed across the square, and the crowd fell into an eager silence. Jonas felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. Rogan Hale. Of course it was Rogan. The man had been sheriff for 3 years now, ever since he'd returned from the East with a badge and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He was the kind of lawman who saw justice as something malleable, something that could be bent and twisted to serve whoever paid him the most or screamed the loudest. Rogan stood on a makeshift platform near the posts, his thumbs hooked in his belt, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this. That was what made Jonas's blood run cold. The man was enjoying this. Now I know you're all wondering what we're doing here today, Rogan announced, his voice carrying across the square with practiced ease. And I'll tell you, these 3 women here, he gestured casually toward the posts as if discussing livestock at auction, have been found guilty of various crimes against the good people of this territory. Found guilty by who? Someone shouted from the crowd. Rogan's smile widened. By me. By the evidence. By common sense and decency. No trial, Jonas thought. No judge, no jury, just Rogan's word against theirs. The old woman there, Rogan continued, pointing at the elderly woman with her eyes closed, was caught stealing bread from the mercantile. The young one was found in a compromising position with a married man, his wife's testimony, not mine. And this one, his finger swung toward the dark-haired woman with the burning eyes. This one is Mara Quinn, accused of murdering her own husband in cold blood 6 months ago. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs. Jonas watched the woman, Mara, and saw her jaw tighten, saw the way her hands clenched behind her back, but she didn't speak, didn't defend herself, just kept staring straight ahead with that terrible, beautiful rage. Now here's the thing, Rogan said, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. We could hang them. That'd be simple enough. Quick drop, broken neck, problem solved. But I got to thinking, what a waste that would be. What a waste of potential. The way he said that last word made Jonas's skin crawl. So here's what I propose, Rogan continued, pacing along the platform like a showman. Any man here who wants a wife, any man willing to take responsibility for one of these women, can have her. Right here, right now. No questions asked. You take her off our hands, she becomes your problem, your responsibility. You keep her in line, you make sure she doesn't cause any more trouble. And in return, well, he grinned, you get yourself a wife without having to court her or win her daddy's approval or any of that nonsense. The crowd erupted again, some in laughter, some in shock, some in eager approval. Jonas felt sick. This wasn't justice. This was humiliation. This was Rogan Hale playing God with 3 women's lives because he could, because no one would stop him. You can't be serious, Jonas heard himself say, his voice cutting through the noise. The crowd turned to look at him. Rogan's eyes found his, and that smile never wavered. Jonas Kincaid, Rogan said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you preferred the company of horses to people. This is wrong, Jonas said, stepping closer to the platform. You can't auction off human beings like they're property. I'm not auctioning them, Rogan replied smoothly. I'm offering them a chance at redemption, a chance to be useful members of society instead of criminals rotting in a cell or swinging from a rope. Seems merciful to me. Merciful, Jonas repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. You call this merciful? I call it practical. Rogan's smile finally faded, his eyes hardening. Now, you got a problem with how I run things, Jonas. You're welcome to take it up with the territorial governor. Until then, I'm the law here, and this is how we're handling it. Jonas opened his mouth to argue, but a small voice stopped him. Papa? He turned to find Elsie and Ivy standing right behind him, having climbed down from the wagon despite his orders. Their golden hair caught the late afternoon sun, making them look like 2 small angels who'd wandered into hell by mistake. Girls, I told you to stay. Papa, look, Ivy whispered, tugging on his coat. Her small finger pointed toward the posts, toward the 3 women. Look at her. Jonas followed his daughter's gaze and realized she was pointing at Mara Quinn, the accused murderer with the bruised face and furious eyes. We have to go home, Jonas said firmly, reaching for their hands. This isn't a place for children. But Elsie grabbed his other coat sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong for such a small child. Papa, wait. Please wait. There was something in her voice, something urgent and frightened and absolutely certain, that made Jonas pause. What is it? He asked quietly, kneeling down to their level. The twins looked at each other, one of those silent conversations that identical siblings seem to have without words. Then Ivy turned back to him, her blue eyes wide and serious. Papa, she whispered. That's her. Jonas frowned. That's who, sweetheart? The snow lady, Elsie breathed, her voice trembling. The lady from the snow. Something cold slithered down Jonas's spine. The snow lady. The girls had mentioned her before, in nightmares and fevered sleep talk, but he'd always assumed it was just a fragment of trauma, a ghost their minds had created to make sense of the night they'd nearly died. It had been 2 winters ago. Jonas had been away at a horse auction, and his wife Sarah had taken the girls into town. A blizzard had blown in without warning, one of those deadly storms that could bury a man in minutes. Sarah had tried to get them home, but the wagon had overturned on the icy road. Sarah had died trying to keep the girls warm, wrapping them in every blanket and coat she had before the cold took her. But somehow, impossibly, the girls had survived. When the search party found them the next morning, they were bundled together under a thick woolen blanket that hadn't belonged to Sarah, singing a song no one recognized. They'd been barely conscious, hypothermic and delirious, but alive. For weeks afterward, they'd talked about a woman in the snow, a lady with dark hair who'd found them, wrapped them up, sang to them until they stopped being cold. The doctors said it was a hallucination brought on by the cold, the mind's way of coping with trauma. Jonas had believed them. He'd had to believe them, because the alternative, that someone had saved his daughters and then vanished into the storm, was too painful to consider. "Girls," he said slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. "What are you saying?" "That's her, Papa," Ivy insisted, pointing again at Mara Quinn. "That's the lady who saved us. That's the lady from the snow." Jonas looked up at the woman tied to the post. She hadn't noticed them yet, was still staring straight ahead with that defiant fury. But now that he looked closer, he could see it, the dark hair the girls had described, the strong features, even the way she stood with her shoulders back despite everything. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Both girls nodded, tears streaming down their faces now. "She sang to us, Papa," Elsie said. "She sang the song about the stars and the river, and she kept us warm, and she told us to hold on, that help was coming, and then she was gone." Jonas's mind raced. If this was true, if this woman really had saved his daughters, then she'd given up her own blanket, her own warmth, to keep two strangers alive. And now she was tied to a post, accused of murder, being offered up like livestock to whoever wanted her. "Any takers?" Rogan's voice rang out across the square. "Come on, gentlemen, don't be shy. These women need husbands, and some of you could use wives. What do you say?" A few men stepped forward toward the crying young woman. Someone else approached the elderly woman, muttering something about needing help with his farm. But no one went near Mara Quinn. No one wanted the accused murderer. "What about you, Jonas?" Rogan called out, spotting him in the crowd. "You've been alone for 2 years now. Those girls of yours could use a mother. What do you say? Choose any woman you want." The words were meant to be generous, but they dripped with mockery. Jonas could hear it, the implication that he was desperate enough, lonely enough, to take damaged goods off the sheriff's hands. He looked down at his daughters. They were clutching his coat, looking up at him with those huge blue eyes that had seen far too much suffering for 5-year-olds. Ivy's lip trembled. Elsie's small voice broke the silence. "Please, Papa, we can't let them hurt her. She saved us." And just like that, Jonas knew what he had to do. He stood up slowly, his decision settling into his bones like stones. He walked through the crowd, which parted before him like water, everyone watching to see what the quiet horse breeder would do. He could feel their eyes on his back, hear the whispers starting up like hornets. When he reached the platform, he looked directly at Rogan Hale. "I'll take her," Jonas said, his voice steady and clear. Rogan's eyebrows shot up. "Which one?" Jonas turned and pointed at Mara Quinn. "Her!" The crowd exploded. Gasps, shouts, someone laughing in disbelief. Jonas ignored all of it, his eyes locked on the woman at the post. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Mara Quinn moved. Her head turned slowly, her dark eyes finding his across the distance. He saw surprise flash across her face, then suspicion, then something that might have been fear. Not of him, but of hope itself. "You sure about that, Jonas?" Rogan asked, his voice lilting with barely concealed amusement. "She's accused of killing her husband. Bashed his head in with a fireplace poker, they say. You want that kind of woman around those precious daughters of yours?" "I'm sure," Jonas said simply. Rogan studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, or maybe hers. Either way, she's your problem now." He turned to one of his deputies. "Cut her loose." The deputy approached Mara with a knife, sawing through the ropes at her wrists. She didn't move as they fell away, just stood there rubbing the raw, bloody marks they'd left behind. Her eyes never left Jonas's face, searching for something, his intentions, maybe, or his sanity. Jonas pulled off his coat and walked toward her. The crowd fell silent, watching. When he reached her, he held out the coat. "Here," he said quietly. "You're shaking." Mara stared at the coat like it might bite her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Why would you—" "My daughters," Jonas said, glancing back at where Elsie and Ivy stood watching, their faces streaked with tears. "They say you saved them once, 2 years ago, in a blizzard. They say you kept them alive." Something flickered in Mara's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Her gaze shifted to the twins, and Jonas saw her face crack just slightly, saw something like pain cross her features before she locked it away again. I don't remember," she said, but her voice was uncertain. "They remember you," Jonas said. He stepped closer, draping the coat over her shoulders before she could protest. "That's enough for me." For a moment they just stood there, close enough that he could see the full extent of the damage someone had done to her face, close enough to see the way her hands trembled even as she tried to hold herself still. Up close, she looked exhausted, not just physically, but soul-deep tired, like someone who'd been fighting for so long she'd forgotten what peace felt like. "Come on," Jonas said gently. "Let's go home." He turned and started walking back through the crowd, trusting that she would follow. Behind him, he heard Rogan's laughter, heard the whispers and jeers from the townspeople. He heard someone spit on the ground and mutter, "Murderer," but he didn't stop, didn't look back. And then he felt it, a small hand slipping into his, not one of his daughters. Mara's hand, thin and cold and shaking, gripping his like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a churning sea. Jonas closed his fingers around hers and kept walking. When they reached the wagon, Elsie and Ivy scrambled into the back, making room. Jonas helped Mara up onto the seat beside him, acutely aware of how carefully she moved, how she winced when she bent her ribs a certain way. Someone had hurt her badly. Recently. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. As they pulled away from the square, away from the crowd and the judgment, and Rogan Hale's mocking smile, Jonas felt Mara's hand slip out of his. For a moment, he thought she was pulling away, putting distance between them. But then he felt a weight against his shoulder and realized she'd simply collapsed, her body folding sideways until her head rested against him, unconscious or just beyond exhausted. He couldn't tell which. Behind them, he heard his daughter's voices, soft and wondering. "Is she okay, Papa?" Elsie whispered. "She will be," Jonas said, though he had no idea if that was true. "She will be." The ride back to the ranch took an hour, the wagon creaking along the dirt road as the sun sank lower in the sky. Mara didn't wake up. She stayed slumped against Jonas's shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady, occasionally making small sounds in her sleep that might have been words or might have been pain. Jonas kept one hand on the reins and the other hovering near her arm, ready to steady her if she started to slip. Behind him, the twins were uncharacteristically quiet, just watching Mara with those serious ancient eyes that children sometimes have. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jonas's house was modest, a 2-story structure he'd built himself, weathered but solid, surrounded by corrals and pastures where his horses grazed. It wasn't much, but it was home. It was safe. He pulled the wagon to a stop and carefully shifted Mara's weight, lifting her down as gently as he could. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Where?" She started, confused, her voice thick with sleep. "It's okay," Jonas said. "We're home. You're safe here." She looked around at the ranch, at the house, at the twins who were already running ahead to open the front door. Something unreadable crossed her face. Disbelief, maybe? Or fear that this was all some kind of trick. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know what they say I did." Jonas met her eyes. "No, I don't. But I know what my daughters say you did. And I know what I just watched that sheriff do. That's enough for now." He carried her toward the house, and this time she didn't protest. She just wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, her face pressed against his shoulder, her breath warm against his throat. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old coffee and the faint scent of lavender from the dried flowers Sarah used to hang in every room. Jonas carried Mara upstairs to the guest room. the one that had been empty since Sarah died, the one he couldn't quite bring himself to change or use. He laid her down on the bed, and immediately Elsie and Ivy were there, climbing up beside her, their small hands patting her arms and face like they were making sure she was real. "It's okay now," Ivy said seriously. "Papa won't let anyone hurt you." "We won't let anyone hurt you," Elsie echoed. "You saved us. Now we save you." Mara's eyes filled with tears, the first emotion Jonas had seen from her beyond rage. She reached out with shaking hands and pulled the girls close, burying her face in their golden hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jonas backed out of the room quietly, giving them space. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to his daughter's soft voices murmuring comfort, listening to Mara cry, really cry, for what might have been the first time in months. "What have I done?" he thought. "What in God's name have I just done?" He'd brought an accused murderer into his home, a woman he didn't know, whose story he hadn't heard, whose guilt or innocence was a complete mystery. He'd done it because his 5-year-old daughters had pointed at her and said, "That's her." Because something in his gut had screamed that what Rogan was doing was wrong. Because when he'd looked into Mara Quinn's furious, exhausted eyes, he'd seen someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for far too long. Jonas walked downstairs and sank into the chair by the cold fireplace, his head in his hands. Outside, the sun finished setting, and darkness crept across the ranch like a living thing. In the guest room upstairs, a woman who'd been condemned without trial slept fitfully between two little girls who believed she'd saved their lives. And in the parlor, a man who'd lost his wife 2 years ago wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the most important decision. Either way, there was no going back now. The house settled into silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood and the distant sound of horses moving in their stalls. Jonas sat there until full dark, staring at nothing, thinking about justice and mercy and the strange, terrible lottery that had brought Mara Quinn to his doorstep. Tomorrow, he'd have questions. Tomorrow, he'd need to figure out what happened next. How to protect his daughters, what to do about the town's whispers and Rogan's inevitable interference. But tonight, for just this one night, he'd let them all rest. He'd let the woman upstairs sleep without fear. He'd let his daughters feel like heroes who'd saved their hero. And he'd let himself believe, just for a moment, that sometimes the right choice and the crazy choice were exactly the same thing. The last thing Jonas heard before exhaustion finally pulled him under was the sound of soft singing from upstairs, an old melody he didn't recognize, something about stars and rivers and the long road home. His daughters' voices joined in, their high, sweet notes twining around Mara's deeper tones. And despite everything, despite the accusations and the bruises and the sheriff's mocking laughter, Jonas smiled. Because for the first time in 2 years, his house didn't sound empty anymore. Morning came too early, slicing through the curtains in thin golden bands that fell across Jonas's face where he'd finally dozed off in the parlor chair. His neck ached from the awkward angle, and for a moment he forgot why he wasn't in his own bed. Then memory crashed back like cold water, the town square, the ropes, Mara Quinn's bruised face, his daughter's desperate whispers. He sat up quickly, listening. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and groans of old wood settling. Too silent. Jonas stood and moved toward the stairs, his heart suddenly hammering. What if she'd run during the night? What if she'd hurt the girls? What if... He reached the guest room and stopped in the doorway. All 3 of them were still there, tangled together in sleep. Elsie had her arm thrown across Mara's waist. Ivy's golden head rested on Mara's shoulder, and Mara herself lay on her back, one hand curved protectively around each girl, her face finally relaxed in true rest. The morning light caught the bruises on her jaw, turning them purple and green, but her expression was peaceful in a way that made Jonas's chest ache. He backed away carefully, not wanting to wake them, and headed downstairs to start coffee. His hand shook slightly as he worked the grinder, the sharp smell of beans filling the kitchen. What was he supposed to do now? He'd acted on instinct yesterday, on faith in his daughter's conviction, but in the harsh light of morning, reality pressed in. He'd brought a stranger into his home, an accused murderer. He knew nothing about her except that the town had condemned her, and his children believed she'd saved them 2 years ago. The coffee was just beginning to boil when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, hesitant footsteps that paused halfway down, as if the person making them was considering retreat. "Coffee's almost ready," Jonas called out, keeping his voice gentle, non-threatening. The footsteps resumed. Mara appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his coat over her torn dress, her dark hair loose and wild around her shoulders. In full daylight, the damage was worse than he'd realized. Not just the bruises on her face, but the way she held herself, favoring her left side, the raw rope burns circling her wrists like grotesque bracelets. "The girls are still asleep," she said quietly. Her voice was rough, like she'd spent years screaming and had only recently learned to whisper again. "Good. They need the rest." Jonas poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across the table toward her. "You should sit. You look like you're about to fall over." Mara hesitated, then lowered herself carefully into the chair, each movement deliberate and pained. She wrapped both hands around the cup, but didn't drink, just stared into the dark liquid like it might hold answers. "I should go," she said finally. It was kind of you, what you did yesterday. Kinder than I deserved. But I can't stay here. It's not safe for you. Not safe for them." "Safe from what?" Jonas asked, sitting down across from her. She looked up at him, and he saw the exhaustion behind her eyes. Not just physical, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been running for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. "From me. From what people think I am. From what I might actually be." "Did you kill your husband?" The question hung between them like smoke. Mara's jaw tightened, and for a moment Jonas thought she wouldn't answer. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Does it matter? The town's already decided I did. Rogan's already decided. Even if I stood in that square and swore on every Bible in the territory, they wouldn't believe me." "I'm not asking what the town believes," Jonas said quietly. "I'm asking what's true." Mara stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something, judgment, maybe, or the inevitable moment when he'd realize his mistake and throw her out. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband's name was Thomas Quinn. We'd been married 3 years. He was a good man when I met him. Funny, gentle, full of big dreams about the life we'd build together." She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup. "But after we married, after we moved out here, something changed. Or maybe it didn't change. Maybe I just finally saw what had always been there underneath." Jonas stayed silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. "He drank," Mara continued. "Not at first, but more and more as the years went on. And when he drank, he got mean. He'd say terrible things, break things, and then—" She stopped, her breath catching. "Then it wasn't just things anymore. It was me." The words fell into the quiet kitchen like stones into still water, and Jonas felt his hands curl into fists under the table. He'd seen it before, during the war and after. Men who took their anger and their fear and their shame out on the people who couldn't fight back. 6 months ago, Mara said, her voice steadier now, as if telling the story was somehow easier than holding it in. Thomas came home drunk. Drunker than usual. He was angry about something. Money, maybe. Or the way I'd looked at another man in town, I don't even remember. He started breaking things, screaming at me, and then he... She stopped, pressing one hand to her bruised ribs as if the memory caused physical pain. "He came at me with his fists, and I ran. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, but he broke down the door. I grabbed the fireplace poker because it was the only weapon I had, and I held it up, told him to stop, told him I'd use it if I had to, and he just laughed. He laughed and said, 'Go ahead, try it.' And he kept coming, and I swung." Mara's voice broke. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "But I missed," she whispered through her fingers. "I swung at him and missed, and the poker flew out of my hands and hit the wall. And then he was on me, choking me, telling me he was going to kill me, that I was worthless, that no one would miss me. I remember his hands around my throat, remember not being able to breathe, and then—" She looked up at Jonas, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then there was a gunshot, just one. Thomas's hands went slack and he fell on top of me, dead weight, and there was blood everywhere. So much blood. I pushed him off me and saw the hole in the back of his head, and when I looked up, Sheriff Rogan was standing in the doorway with a gun in his hand. Jonas felt ice slide down his spine. Rogan shot him? He saved my life, Mara said, but there was something strange in her voice, something that didn't match the words. That's what he told me. He said he'd heard the commotion, had come to investigate, saw Thomas attacking me through the window and shot him. He said he'd saved my life and I should be grateful. But you're not, Jonas said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Mara's laugh was hollow. I was, at first. I thanked him. I cried on his shoulder, and then he said, her voice dropped so low Jonas had to lean forward to hear it. He said, I owed him now. He said saving my life made us connected. He said Thomas was a drunk and a fool who didn't appreciate what he had, but Rogan would. Rogan would take care of me if I'd just be grateful. The implication hung in the air like poison. Jonas felt his stomach turn. I told him no, Mara continued. I told him I was grateful, but I wasn't interested in that kind of arrangement, and he smiled at me. This cold smile that made my skin crawl, and he said, that's unfortunate, just like that. That's unfortunate. She took a shaky breath. 2 days later, he came back with deputies. Said there were witnesses who saw me fight with Thomas earlier that day. Said the angle of the bullet was all wrong for someone shooting from the doorway. Said maybe I'd shot Thomas myself and was trying to blame it on a lawman. He arrested me, put me in a cell, and let the whole town believe I was a murderer. And every time he came to bring me food or water, he'd ask if I'd changed my mind about being grateful. Every single time. Jesus Christ, Jonas breathed. I refused every time, Mara said, and there was steel in her voice now, that same defiant fire he'd seen in the town square. Even when he started beating me, even when he told me I'd hang if I didn't cooperate, I'd rather die than let that man touch me. So he found another way to punish you, Jonas said, understanding fully now. The post, the crowd, offering you up like livestock. He thought he was being generous, Mara said bitterly. Thought some desperate man would take me, and then at least I wouldn't hang. But he made sure everyone knew what I was accused of, made sure no decent man would want me. He thought I'd watch them take the other women and leave me there alone. Thought I'd beg him to save me, to take me himself rather than face the noose. But then my daughters pointed at you, Jonas said softly. Mara's expression cracked, something vulnerable showing through. I don't understand why. I don't remember saving anyone. I mean, she pressed her hand to her forehead. I remember a storm 2 winters ago. I remember being out in it, remember finding something in the snow, but everything after that is blank. I woke up 3 days later in a neighbor's barn with a concussion and frostbite. They said I'd been found unconscious on the road, half frozen. I lost part of that winter to fever and confusion. If I did save your daughters, I don't remember it. They remember you, Jonas said. They remember the song you sang, something about stars and a river? Mara's hand froze on the coffee cup. My mother's song, she whispered. She used to sing it to me when I was little. I don't even remember the words anymore, not all of them, but sometimes when I'm scared or cold, I find myself humming it without thinking. They said you wrapped them in a blanket. Sarah, my wife, was already gone when the search party found them. But the girls had a blanket no one recognized, and they kept saying a dark-haired lady had given it to them. Mara's eyes went distant, like she was trying to grasp at smoke. I had a blanket that winter, wool, dark green. My grandmother made it. I loved that blanket. She looked at Jonas, confusion and wonder mixing on her face. I don't know what happened to it. After I woke up, I never saw it again. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun growing stronger through the windows. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. Jonas could hear his horses moving in their stalls, stamping and snorting, ready for breakfast. So what now? Mara asked finally. You know what they think I am. You know Rogan will make your life hell for taking me. You know... Her voice dropped. You know I might be dangerous. I might be exactly what they say I am, and I just don't remember it right. Jonas stood and refilled his coffee cup, buying himself time to think. What did he know, really? He knew the town had condemned this woman without a proper trial. He knew Rogan Hale was the kind of man who used his badge like a weapon. He knew his daughters, who never lied, who saw the world with a clarity adults lost somewhere along the way, believed this woman had saved their lives. And he knew, looking at Mara Quinn sitting at his kitchen table with rope burns on her wrists and bruises on her face, that she'd been fighting her own private war for months and hadn't broken yet. "Now," Jonas said, turning back to face her, "you stay here. You rest. You heal. And we figure out the rest as we go." "You can't just bait." "I can," Jonas interrupted firmly. "My house, my choice. And I'm choosing to believe my daughters know exactly what they're talking about." Mara stared at him like he'd just sprouted a second head. "You're crazy. You know that? Absolutely out of your mind." "Been called worse." Jonas allowed himself a small smile. "Besides, you think you're the first person everyone else gave up on? I've got a barn full of horses other people said were too broken to fix. Turned out they weren't broken, just needed someone patient enough to listen." "I'm not a horse," Mara said, but there was the ghost of amusement in her voice. "No, you're not. You're the woman who saved my daughters when she had every reason to save herself instead. That counts for something in my book." Before Mara could respond, small footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Elsie burst into the kitchen, her golden hair flying, Ivy right behind her. "Papa, she's gone. We thought she left." Elsie stopped, her eyes finding Mara at the table. Her whole face lit up. "You're still here!" Ivy rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Mara's neck from behind, nearly knocking her out of the chair. "We thought you disappeared again, like in the snow." Mara's arms came up automatically, steadying the little girl, and Jonas saw her expression shift, confusion giving way to something softer, something that looked almost like wonder. "I'm still here," Mara said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" Elsie demanded, climbing onto Mara's lap despite the fact that Mara winced from her bruised ribs. "You have to promise." Mara looked helplessly at Jonas over the girls' heads. He just raised his eyebrows, leaving the choice to her. She could lie to make the moment easier. She could tell the truth and break two small hearts. Or she could do something harder, trust that maybe, just maybe, this strange sanctuary might hold. "I promise," Mara whispered, and wrapped both arms around the twins like they were the only solid things in a tilting world. "I promise I'll stay as long as your papa lets me." The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Mara moved through the house like a ghost at first, silent and careful, as if afraid that breathing too loudly might shatter whatever fragile grace had brought her there. She slept in the guest room, but spent most nights sitting in the chair by the window, watching the darkness as if expecting Rogan or the townspeople to come with torches and ropes. But no one came. The ranch was too far from town, too isolated for casual visitors. Jonas worked with his horses during the day, and Mara slowly began to move around the house, doing small things, washing dishes, sweeping floors, mending the girls' clothes that had been waiting in a basket since Sarah died. "You don't have to do that," Jonas told her one afternoon, finding her bent over a pair of Ivy's boots, stitching up a split seam with careful, precise movements. "I need to do something," Mara said without looking up. "If I just sit, I think too much. If I think too much, I remember." So Jonas let her work. He watched her repair clothes with stitches so small and even they looked like machine work. He watched her brush the girl's hair each morning, her hands gentle as she worked through the tangles, humming that old melody they claimed to remember. He watched her teach them things, how to knead bread properly, how to identify edible plants from the poisonous ones, how to move quietly through the world without drawing attention. "Where did you learn all this?" Jonas asked one evening, watching her show the twins how to braid leather into a bracelet. Mara's hands paused. "My mother. She died when I was 12. After that, it was just my brother and me. We had to learn how to survive." Her voice went distant. "Rowan was older. He taught me to read, to think, to stand up for myself. He always said knowledge was the only thing nobody could take from you, not even with a gun." "Where is he now, your brother?" Something flickered across Mara's face. Pain, longing, shame. "I don't know. We had a fight before I married Thomas. Rowan didn't like him, said he saw something wrong underneath. I didn't listen. Told Rowan if he couldn't be happy for me, I didn't want him around. And he left." I haven't seen him since. You ever try to find him? How? Mara's laugh was bitter. I've been either trapped in a marriage or trapped in a cell. Wasn't exactly free to go searching. She looked down at her hands, at the leather braid taking shape between her fingers. Besides, after what happened to Thomas, after the accusations, maybe it's better Rowan doesn't know where I am. Better he's not connected to this mess. Jonas wanted to argue, but he understood that kind of protective isolation. After Sarah died, he'd pushed away friends, family, anyone who might need something from him that he didn't have to give. Sometimes loneliness felt safer than the alternative. 3 weeks passed. Spring deepened into early summer, and the ranch bloomed with wildflowers and new grass. The horses grew sleek and healthy. The girls laughed more than they had in 2 years, following Mara everywhere, peppering her with questions, demanding stories and songs and lessons. And Mara began to soften. The hardness in her eyes eased slightly. She smiled occasionally, small, uncertain smiles that looked out of practice but genuine. She started eating more, sleeping better. The bruises faded to yellow and green, then slowly disappeared entirely. But the peace couldn't last forever. Jonas knew that. He just didn't know how quickly it would shatter. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Jonas was in the barn checking on a mare who'd seemed off her feed when Elsie came running, her face white with panic. "Papa! Papa! Come quick! Ivy's sick!" Jonas dropped everything and ran. He found Ivy in the parlor, curled on the sofa, shaking violently despite the warm evening. Her face was flushed with fever, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Mara was already there, one hand on the girl's forehead, her face tight with worry. "How long has she been like this?" Jonas demanded, kneeling beside his daughter. "It came on fast," Mara said. "She was fine an hour ago, and then she said she was cold. Now she's burning up." Jonas touched Ivy's forehead and felt the heat radiating from her skin. Too hot, dangerously hot. "Ivy, sweetheart, can you hear me?" "I'm so cold, Papa," Ivy whispered. "So cold. Where's the blanket? Where's the lady's blanket?" Jonas's blood ran cold. What did she say? "The blanket," Ivy mumbled, her eyes rolling. "The green blanket, so warm." She sang about the stars and the river. "She's delirious," Mara said, but her voice shook. "It's the fever talking." But then Elsie gasped from the doorway. "Papa, I don't feel good either." Jonas turned to see his other daughter swaying on her feet, her face going pale. Before he could move, Elsie's eyes rolled back and she crumpled. Mara lunged and caught her just before she hit the floor. "Get them upstairs," Jonas said, fighting down panic. "Both of them. We need to bring the fever down." They worked through the night. Jonas ran back and forth with cold water and cloths, while Mara sat between the girls' beds, bathing their burning skin, holding them when they thrashed, singing that old melody over and over because it seemed to be the only thing that calmed them. But as the hours wore on and the fever refused to break, the girls began to mumble. Disjointed words, fragments of memory, things that made no sense to Jonas but seemed to mean everything to Mara. "The snow," Ivy whispered. "So much snow. Mama's not moving. Why isn't Mama moving?" "We have to stay warm," Elsie moaned. "Have to hold on. The lady said help is coming. She promised help is coming." "The stars are so pretty," Ivy said, tears streaming down her fevered face. "She's singing about the stars." "Don't stop singing. Please don't stop." "The blanket's green," Elsie mumbled. "Soft and green and warm, but she's shaking. Why is she shaking?" "She gave us the blanket," Ivy said. "She's not wearing the blanket anymore. She gave it to us." Mara's hand stilled on the cloth she was wringing out. Jonas saw her face go white, saw recognition dawn like the sun. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I remember." Jonas started, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at the twins with wide, horrified eyes, her hands trembling. "The storm. I remember the storm. I was traveling, trying to get to the next town before the blizzard hit, but I didn't make it. I took shelter under a tree and then I heard crying, children crying. I followed the sound and found them. 2 little girls huddled together next to an overturned wagon, next to a woman who wasn't moving. I knew the woman was dead. I knew the girls would be dead too if I didn't do something." Her voice cracked. and Jonas saw tears streaming down her face. I only had one blanket. I gave it to them, wrapped them up as tight as I could. I sang to them because I didn't know what else to do, because they were so scared, and I needed them to stay calm, to stay awake. I sang my mother's song about the stars and the river, and I promised them help was coming, that they just had to hold on a little longer. How long? Jonas asked hoarsely. How long did you stay with them? I don't know. Hours, maybe. Until I couldn't feel my hands anymore, couldn't feel my feet. Until everything started going black at the edges. The last thing I remember is lying down next to them, trying to keep them warm with my body, and then... She pressed her hands to her face. Nothing. I woke up days later in someone's barn, half dead from exposure. I asked about the children, but no one knew what I was talking about. I thought I'd imagined it, thought the cold had made me hallucinate. I thought they'd died, and my mind invented a story where I tried to save them because I couldn't live with the alternative. She looked at Jonas with devastated eyes. But they're real. They survived because I gave them my blanket and my warmth and everything I had left. And then I forgot. How could I forget? The head injury? Jonas said quietly, remembering what she'd told him about waking up with a concussion. You forgot because your brain was trying to survive. But Mara... He moved to sit beside her, taking her shaking hands in his. You didn't forget the part that mattered. You saved them. You gave up everything to save two children you'd never met, and you nearly died doing it. That's what matters. She's so cold, Ivy mumbled from the bed. Don't be cold, lady. Take the blanket back. Can't, Elsie whispered. Can't take it back. It's ours now. She gave it to us. Mara made a broken sound and buried her face against Jonas's shoulder. He held her while she sobbed, great gasping cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded, while his daughters burned with fever and remembered the night a stranger had loved them enough to freeze. Dawn was breaking when the fevers finally peaked and broke. Both girls opened their eyes, clear and focused again, soaked with sweat but alive. Conscious. Safe. Papa? Ivy whispered. What happened? You were sick, baby girl, Jonas said, brushing her damp hair back. But you're going to be okay now. Elsie's eyes found Mara, who was still sitting between their beds, exhausted and tear-stained. You stayed with us. Of course I stayed, Mara said hoarsely. Where else would I be? In the snow, Elsie said seriously. You stayed with us in the snow too, even when you were so cold, even when you didn't have your blanket anymore. Mara's breath caught. You remember that? You really remember? We always remembered, Ivy said. But Papa didn't believe us. The doctors said we dreamed it. You didn't dream it, Mara whispered. I was there. I promise I was there. We know, the twins said together, and reached for her with small, certain hands. Jonas stood and backed out of the room, giving them space, giving himself space to process what had just happened. He walked downstairs on shaking legs and collapsed into the parlor chair, the same chair where he'd dozed off that first night, the same chair where he'd made the decision to walk into that square and claim a woman everyone else had abandoned. Now he understood why the girls had recognized her, why they'd pointed with such absolute certainty. They hadn't just known her face, they'd known her sacrifice, had carried the memory of it in their bones even when their minds struggled to believe. Mara had given everything to save two strangers in a storm. And now, by some strange grace or fate or cosmic justice, those two strangers had given her a home when she needed it most. Jonas put his head in his hands and finally allowed himself to cry. For his wife, for his daughters, for the woman upstairs who'd forgotten her own heroism until fever brought the memories back. He cried for all of it, great heaving sobs that shook his shoulders and left him feeling hollowed out and strangely clean. When he finally looked up, the sun was fully risen, painting the world gold and new. He could hear voices upstairs, Mara's low and gentle, the twins high and bright, all of them laughing about something he couldn't quite hear. Jonas stood and walked to the window, looking out over his ranch, his horses, his land. This place had been a tomb for 2 years, a monument to grief and loss. But somehow, in the space of 3 weeks, it had become something else, something that felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. The whispers started 3 days after the fever broke. Jonas first heard them at the feed store, where old Martin Cooper was measuring out oats with hands that shook just slightly with age. The store had been busy when Jonas walked in, but conversation died the moment the door chimed his arrival. Men who'd known him for years suddenly found urgent business studying their boots or examining sacks of grain they'd seen 1,000 times before. "Morning, Martin," Jonas said evenly, refusing to acknowledge the silence. "Jonas?" Martin's voice was careful, neutral. He measured the oats without meeting Jonas's eyes. "Heard your girls took sick." "They're better now. Fever broke clean." "Good. That's good." Martin tied off the sack with quick, efficient movements. "Also heard you got yourself some help out at the ranch these days." There it was. Jonas kept his face expressionless as he counted out coins. "News travels fast. Always does in a small town." Martin finally looked at him, and there was something in his eyes. Not quite pity, not quite warning, but somewhere in between. "Folks are talking, Jonas, saying maybe you didn't think things through, saying maybe you're putting those girls in danger." "Folks should mind their own business," Jonas said quietly, but there was steel underneath. "Maybe so. But when a man brings home a woman accused of murder, folks tend to get nervous, especially when there's children involved." Jonas picked up the sack of oats, the weight of it solid against his shoulder. "The woman's name is Mara, and she's no more a murderer than you or me." "You sure about that?" The voice came from behind him, and Jonas didn't need to turn around to know who it belonged to. He'd recognize that smooth, confident drawl anywhere. Sheriff Rogan Hale stood in the doorway, one hand resting casually on his gun belt, his badge catching the morning light. He smiled like they were old friends, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Sheriff," Jonas said flatly. "Jonas Kincaid. Been meaning to ride out to your place, see how you're settling in with your new arrangement." Rogan stepped fully into the store, and the other customers suddenly remembered they had business elsewhere. Within moments, Jonas and Rogan were alone except for Martin, who'd gone very still behind his counter. "Arrangement's fine," Jonas said. "Don't need checking on." "See, that's where you're wrong." Rogan's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "When a man takes custody of a known criminal, that becomes my business. That becomes everyone's business, especially when that criminal might be a danger to innocent children. She's not a danger to anyone." "You sound mighty certain about that. Tell me, Jonas, what exactly do you know about Mara Quinn? Besides what she's told you, which I'm guessing is quite the sob story." Jonas shifted the oat sack to his other shoulder, using the movement to put more distance between himself and the sheriff. "I know enough. Do you know she and Thomas fought constantly? That neighbors heard her threatening to kill him more than once? Do you know she was found standing over his body with his blood on her hands, with the murder weapon right there on the floor where she dropped it?" "I know you were the one who shot him," Jonas said quietly, and watched Rogan's smile freeze. "I know you killed Thomas Quinn and then tried to leverage that into getting what you wanted from his widow. When she refused, you framed her for murder." The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Martin made a small sound behind his counter, quickly stifled. Rogan's hand drifted closer to his gun, and Jonas tensed, ready to drop the oats and defend himself if necessary. But Rogan just laughed, a cold, amused sound that raised the hair on Jonas's neck. "Is that what she told you? That I killed her husband? Jonas, Jonas, Jonas? The woman's playing you like a fiddle. She killed Thomas in a rage, panicked when she realized what she'd done, and has been lying ever since. I saved her life that night, pulled her off the body before she could do any more damage, and this is how she repays me, by spreading vicious lies." "Funny how your story changes depending on who's listening," Jonas observed. Rogan's eyes hardened. "Careful, Jonas. You're walking a dangerous line here, harboring a criminal, making wild accusations against a peace officer. Those are serious matters." "Then arrest me," Jonas met his gaze steadily. "If I'm breaking the law, if she's the dangerous criminal you claim, then do your job. Arrest both of us. Bring us before a judge, let a jury decide." "Oh, I could do that," Rogan said softly. "But here's the thing. I'm a reasonable man. I understand you've been alone a long time. Understand those girls need a mother figure. I'm willing to overlook your poor judgment." willing to let you keep the woman if you just cooperate. Cooperate how? Send her to town once a week to check in with me. Let me make sure she's behaving herself. That's all. Just a simple courtesy call. Rogan's smile returned, oily and knowing. I'm sure she won't mind. She used to be quite cooperative before she got all these grand ideas about dignity and respectability. Jonas felt rage surge through him like wildfire, hot and consuming. His hands clenched on the oat sack hard enough to split the fabric. You stay away from her. You stay away from my ranch. You stay away from my family. Your family? Rogan raised his eyebrows mockingly. Jonas, she's not your family. She's a murderer you picked up in the town square like a stray dog. Don't fool yourself into thinking she's something she's not. And don't fool yourself into thinking your badge makes you untouchable, Jonas shot back. You might have this town scared, but I'm not afraid of you. Maybe you should be. Rogan's voice dropped, losing all pretense of friendliness. Because here's what's going to happen. I'm calling a town meeting tomorrow night. We're going to discuss the situation out at the Kincaid Ranch. Let good people voice their concerns about having an accused murderer living among them. And if the town decides that woman is a danger, which they will, then I'll have no choice but to remove her from your custody for the safety of the community, for the safety of those precious little girls. Jonas took a step forward, and Rogan's hand closed around his gun. Don't, the sheriff warned. Don't give me a reason, Jonas. I'd hate to have to explain to those girls why their daddy attacked a peace officer and ended up in a cell. They stood frozen like that for a long moment, tension crackling between them like lightning. Then Jonas forced himself to step back, to unclench his fists, to swallow the rage threatening to choke him. Tomorrow night, Rogan repeated. Town Hall, 7 o'clock. I expect to see you there, Jonas, alone. Leave the woman and the children at home. This is a discussion for adults. He tipped his hat mockingly and sauntered out of the store, leaving Jonas shaking with fury and fear. Jesus, Jonas, Martin breathed from behind the counter. You just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. I made that enemy the day I cut Mara loose from that post, Jonas said. He threw coins on the counter, not bothering to count them. Thanks for the oats, Martin. He walked out into the bright morning, the weight of the oat sack nothing compared to the weight settling in his chest. A town meeting. Tomorrow night. Rogan was going to turn the entire town against them, was going to use fear and gossip and self-righteous morality to take Mara away. And there wasn't a damn thing Jonas could do to stop it. Or was there? An idea began to form as he loaded the oats into his wagon. It was desperate, probably foolish, but it was the only card he had left to play. If Rogan wanted to put on a show, to let the town condemn Mara based on lies and rumors, then Jonas would have to give them the truth. All of it. In front of everyone. He just had to convince Mara to stand up in front of the people who'd already judged her and tell her story one more time. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Jonas rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd explain that the fragile peace they'd built was about to be shattered. When he finally pulled up to the house, he found Mara in the garden with the twins, teaching them which plants were weeds and which were herbs worth keeping. The sight of them, Mara's dark head bent close to the girl's golden ones, all three of them laughing at something, made his heart clench. Papa! Elsie spotted him first and came running. Mara's teaching us about mint and sage and rosemary. And thyme, Ivy added, holding up a sprig of the fragrant herb. Smell, Papa! Jonas dutifully sniffed the thyme, made appropriate appreciative sounds, then met Mara's eyes over the girls' heads. She read his expression immediately, her smile fading. Girls, she said quietly, why don't you take those herbs inside and put them in water? We'll hang them to dry later. The twins scampered off, chattering about herbs and gardens and what they'd make for dinner. The moment they disappeared into the house, Mara stood and brushed dirt from her skirt. What happened? She asked simply. Jonas told her everything. The silence in the feed store, the confrontation with Rogan, the town meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. With each word, he watched the light drain from Mara's face, watched her shoulders curve inward as if bracing against a blow. So that's it then, she said when he finished. Her voice was flat, empty. He's going to take me back. Going to finish what he started in that square. No. Jonas stepped closer, catching her hands before she could turn away. No, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to that meeting, both of us. We're going to stand in front of that town and tell them the truth about what Rogan did, about who you really are. We're going to make them listen." Mara laughed, and it was the most broken sound Jonas had ever heard. "You think they'll believe me? They didn't believe me when I tried to tell them 6 months ago. They won't believe me now. They'll believe the twins. They'll believe what happened in that storm." Jonas squeezed her hands. "Mara, you saved my daughter's lives. Everyone in that town knows Elsie and Ivy, knows they don't lie. When they tell the story of what you did for them—" "It won't matter," Mara interrupted, "because Rogan will say I'm using them, manipulating them. He'll say I've convinced you and the girls that I'm some kind of hero when really I'm just a murderer who got lucky." She pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should just go, tonight, before the meeting. I'll disappear, and then you and the girls will be safe. Rogan will have no reason to come after you." "And where will you go?" Jonas demanded. "You have no money, no horse, nowhere to run. How long do you think you'd last out there alone? A day? 2? "Longer than I'll last in Rogan's custody," Mara shot back. "At least out there I'd die free." "Nobody's dying." Jonas's voice came out harder than he intended. "I didn't cut you down from that post just to watch you give up now. I didn't bring you into my home, let you become part of my daughter's lives, just to have you run the moment things get hard. This isn't just hard, Jonas. This is impossible. You're asking me to stand up in front of everyone who already hates me and bare my soul, knowing they've already decided what they think. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To know that no matter what you say, no matter what truth you tell, they'll never believe you?" "Yes," Jonas said quietly. "I do. I felt it every day after Sarah died when people looked at me with pity and whispered about how I couldn't take care of my own daughters, couldn't keep my wife alive, couldn't do anything right. I know what it's like to be judged before you open your mouth, but I also know that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth is strong enough to change minds, especially when it comes from people they can't ignore." "The girls," Mara breathed, understanding dawning. "You want Elsie and Ivy to testify. Only if you agree. Only if you think you can stand up there with us and fight." Jonas stepped closer again, close enough to see the fear and hope warring in her eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you, Mara. Tomorrow night is going to be brutal. Rogan's going to say terrible things. The town's going to say terrible things. It's going to hurt, and it's going to be hard. And there's a chance we'll lose anyway. But at least we'll lose fighting. At least we'll lose together." Mara stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much?" Jonas thought about that night 3 weeks ago, about watching a woman with bruised cheeks and fire in her eyes refuse to be broken. He thought about his daughter's absolute certainty, about the way Mara had sat between their beds during the fever, singing until her voice gave out. He thought about finding her in his kitchen that first morning, looking like she expected to be thrown out any moment, and the way she'd slowly, carefully let herself believe she might deserve a second chance. "Because you're family now," he said simply, "and we don't abandon family. Not ever." Mara's eyes filled with tears. She pressed one hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking, and Jonas pulled her into his arms and let her cry. He held her while she broke apart, while all the fear and rage and exhausted hope she'd been holding together finally spilled over. He held her and promised silently that whatever happened tomorrow night, whatever Rogan tried to do, Jonas Kincaid would not let this woman fall. Not again. Not ever again. That night, they prepared. Jonas explained to the girls what would happen at the meeting, asked if they felt brave enough to tell their story. Both twins nodded solemnly, their small faces fierce with determination. "We'll tell everyone what Mara did," Elsie promised. "We'll make them understand." "She's a hero," Ivy added firmly. "Heroes don't murder people." Jonas could only hope the town would see it that way. The next evening arrived too quickly. Jonas dressed in his best clothes, the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, dark and somber and respectable. Mara wore the only decent dress she owned, a simple gray thing that made her look like a ghost, all pale skin and dark eyes. The twins wore matching blue dresses Jonas's mother had sent last Christmas, their golden hair brushed and braided. They looked like a family. That was what struck Jonas as they climbed into the wagon. They looked like a proper family heading to church or a social, not a trial that would determine whether they'd all be together tomorrow or torn apart forever. The ride into town was silent except for the creak of wagon wheels and the soft sound of Mara humming that old melody, trying to calm herself. Jonas wanted to say something reassuring, something brave, but all the words felt hollow, so he just reached over and took her hand, and she gripped his fingers so hard it hurt. The town hall was already packed when they arrived. People spilled out onto the street, craning their necks to see inside. Jonas felt his stomach drop. Half of Willow Bend had turned out for this spectacle, eager to watch the drama unfold. "Mama, I'm scared," Ivy whispered, using the name that had become natural over the past weeks. Mara flinched at the word, then gathered both girls close. "Me too, sweetheart. But we're going to be brave anyway, okay? Sometimes being brave means being scared and doing it anyway." They pushed through the crowd, which parted reluctantly, people muttering and pointing. Jonas kept one hand on Mara's back, guiding her forward, trying to shield her from the worst of the stares. Inside, the hall was stuffy and hot, packed with bodies and judgment. Rogan stood at the front on a raised platform, looking like a king holding court. His deputies flanked him, hands resting on their guns. When he saw Jonas and Mara enter, his smile was triumphant. "Ah, there's our guests of honor," Rogan announced loudly. "Jonas Kincaid and his new companion. Please, come to the front. Don't be shy." Jonas led his family down the center aisle, feeling every eye on them. He heard whispers, murder, shame, those poor children. Mara walked with her head high, but he could feel her trembling against his side. They reached the front, and Rogan gestured magnanimously to a bench. "Please sit. Get comfortable. This might take a while." Jonas remained standing. "Let's get this over with, Rogan. Say what you came to say." "Very well." Rogan turned to address the crowd. "Folks, thank you for coming tonight. We're here to discuss a matter of public safety. As you all know, Jonas Kincaid recently claimed Mara Quinn from custody. Mrs. Quinn stands accused of murdering her husband, Thomas, in cold blood. Now, Jonas insists she's innocent, that she poses no threat to his children or anyone else. But I think we all deserve to hear the facts before we allow a known killer to live freely in our community." "She's not a killer," Elsie shouted suddenly, her small voice cutting through the murmurs. "She's good. She saved us." Rogan's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure she seems very nice, sweetheart. Bad people often do. That's how they trick good folks like your daddy." "She's not tricking anyone," Jonas said sharply. "And she deserves a chance to tell her side of the story. That's what this meeting is supposed to be about. Isn't it? Hearing both sides?" "By all means." Rogan swept his hand in invitation. "Mrs. Quinn, please, tell these good people your version of events. Explain how you came to be standing over your husband's body with murder in your eyes." Mara stood slowly. Jonas saw her hands shaking, saw her take a deep breath to steady herself. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the hall. She told them everything. The marriage that had turned violent, Thomas's drinking and rage, the night he came home intent on killing her. She told them about the fireplace poker she'd tried to use to defend herself, about the hands around her throat, about blacking out from lack of air. And she told them about Rogan, about the gunshot that killed Thomas, about the sheriff's demands afterward, about his threats when she refused. The hall erupted. People shouted questions, accusations, disbelief. Rogan held up his hands, playing the wounded public servant perfectly. "You see?" he said sadly. "This is what I warned you about. Mrs. Quinn is delusional, willing to accuse an officer of the law rather than admit her own guilt. She killed her husband in a fit of rage, and now she's trying to destroy my reputation to save herself." "She's telling the truth," Jonas said firmly. "Every word." "Can you prove that?" Rogan challenged. "Can you prove anything she said? Or are we just supposed to take the word of a murderer and the man who's clearly besotted with her?" Jonas opened his mouth, but he had nothing. No proof, no evidence. Just faith in Mara's story and his daughter's memory. It wasn't enough. He could see it in the crowd's faces. They wanted to believe the sheriff, wanted the simple story where the bad woman got what she deserved. And then, from the back of the hall, a new voice cut through the chaos. "I can prove it." Every head turned. A man pushed through the crowd, tall and lean with dark hair going gray at the temples, dressed in a travel-worn coat and carrying a leather satchel. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes were the same deep brown as Mara's. Mara gasped. "Rowan?" The man's stern expression cracked into something softer. "Hello, little sister. Sorry I'm late." Rowan Quinn moved through the stunned crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Jonas watched Mara's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally joy as her brother reached the front of the hall. "Rowan, when did you—" Mara's voice broke. "I've been looking for you for 6 months," Rowan said quietly. "Ever since I heard about Thomas. I knew you didn't kill him, knew something was wrong. So I started digging." He turned to face the crowd, his voice strengthening. "My name is Rowan Quinn. I'm a journalist for the Denver Chronicle, and for the past 6 months I've been investigating the death of Thomas Quinn and the corruption in Willow Bend Sheriff's Office." Rogan's face had gone pale. "This is highly irregular. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can when I have evidence of a crime," Rowan interrupted smoothly. He opened his satchel and pulled out a stack of papers and what looked like a small wooden box with brass fittings, a recording device. "I have witness statements, financial records showing regular payments from Rogan Hale to known criminals, and most importantly, I have this." He held up the recording device, and the crowd pressed forward, curious. "What is that?" someone called out. "This boy," Rowan said, "is a wax cylinder recording made by Thomas Quinn 3 days before he died. He came to me terrified, saying he needed to record his testimony in case something happened to him. He said Sheriff Rogan Hale had been threatening him, demanding payment for protection. When Thomas couldn't pay, Rogan threatened to take what he wanted from Thomas's wife instead. Thomas refused, told Rogan to stay away from Mara, and Rogan told him—" Rowan's voice dropped, every word falling into silence like stones. "Rogan told him that one way or another he'd have Mara Quinn, even if it meant putting Thomas in the ground." The hall exploded with noise. Rogan lunged forward, reaching for the device, but Jonas stepped in his way. "Don't," Jonas warned. "That's fake," Rogan snarled. "It's a trick, a fabrication." "Then you won't mind if we play it," Rowan said calmly. He turned a crank on the device, adjusting something, and then Thomas Quinn's voice filled the hall, scratchy and distant, but unmistakable. "My name is Thomas Quinn, and I'm recording this on March 10th, 1878. If you're hearing this, something's happened to me, and you need to know the truth. Sheriff Rogan Hale killed me. He's been harassing my wife for months, making advances, demanding she leave me. I've refused to let him near her, and he's threatened to kill me unless I cooperate. Tonight he came to my house drunk, said he was tired of waiting, said one way or another he'd have Mara. I told him to get out, and he pulled his gun. If I'm dead, it's because Rogan Hale murdered me. Don't let him get away with it. Don't let him hurt my Mara. Please." The recording ended with a loud crack that might have been a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute, crushing, every eye in the hall fixed on Sheriff Rogan Hale, who stood frozen, his face twisted with rage and fear. "That's a lie," Rogan said, but his voice shook. "That's a goddamn lie, and you all know it. Thomas Quinn was a drunk who beat his wife. He probably made that recording while he was drunk off his ass talking nonsense." "The date stamp matches," Rowan said coldly. "March 10th, 3 days before Thomas died. And I have a witness who saw you entering the Quinn house the night of the murder. I have receipts showing you purchased ammunition that matches the bullet that killed Thomas. And I have testimony from 3 women you've harassed the same way you harassed my sister." He stepped closer to Rogan, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're done. You're finished. And if there's any justice in this world, you'll hang for what you've done." Rogan's hand flew to his gun, but before he could draw it, his own deputies grabbed his arms, wrenching the weapon away. The hall erupted in chaos, people shouting, demanding answers, pressing forward. Jonas quickly pulled Mara and the girls back, shielding them from the crowd. "Order!" One of the deputies, a young man Jonas recognized as Ben Holloway, fired his gun into the ceiling. "Everyone calm down! Sheriff Hale, you're under arrest for murder and corruption. You have the right to—" "This is insane!" Rogan thrashed against the men holding him, his composure finally shattering. "You can't do this. I'm the law here. I'm the only thing standing between this town and chaos." "You are the chaos," Ben said quietly. "And you're done." They dragged Rogan out of the hall, still screaming about justice and betrayal and lies. The crowd watched in stunned silence, then slowly began to disperse, whispering and exclaiming and trying to process what had just happened. Jonas felt Mara collapse against him, her legs giving out. He caught her, held her up, and felt her whole body shaking with sobs. Not grief this time, but relief so profound it was almost painful. "It's over," she kept whispering. "It's over. It's finally over." Rowan approached them, his stern expression softening as he took in his sister's tears. "Mara, I'm so sorry I wasn't there sooner. I should have—" "You came," Mara said, pulling away from Jonas to throw her arms around her brother. "You came when it mattered. You saved me." "No," Rowan said, looking at Jonas over Mara's head. "He saved you. I just brought the proof." Jonas met the other man's eyes and saw understanding there, respect, and something like gratitude. They'd both fought for the same woman, in different ways. They'd both refused to let her fall. People began approaching then, cautiously at first, then in a flood. Men Jonas had known for years, women who'd brought food after Sarah died, neighbors and acquaintances all looking ashamed and sorry and eager to make amends. "Mrs. Quinn, I'm so sorry. We should have listened. If there's anything we can do." Mara handled it with grace. Jonas didn't know she possessed, accepting their apologies with quiet dignity, asking nothing in return. But he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she leaned on him more and more as the evening wore on. Finally, Jonas said, "We need to go home now. Thank you all for listening, for believing." He guided Mara toward the door, the twins following close behind. They'd almost made it out when old Martin Cooper stopped them, his weathered face apologetic. "Jonas, Mrs. Quinn, I just wanted to say I knew Rogan was no good. I should have said something sooner, should have stood up. I'm sorry." "You're saying something now," Jonas said simply. "That's what matters." Outside, the night air was cool and clean, washing away the stuffiness of the hall. Jonas helped Mara into the wagon, then lifted the girls up. They were both fighting sleep, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. Rowan appeared beside the wagon. "I'm staying at the boarding house for a few days. Tomorrow, we should talk. About everything. About what comes next." "Come to the ranch for supper," Jonas offered. 6 o'clock. We'll talk then." Rowan nodded and squeezed his sister's hand one more time before disappearing into the darkness. The ride home was quiet. The twins fell asleep almost immediately, curled together in the wagon bed. Mara sat beside Jonas, staring up at the stars, tears still sliding silently down her face. "You're free," Jonas said softly. "Truly free. No more accusations, no more threats. Rogan can't hurt you anymore." "I know," Mara whispered. "I just can't quite believe it yet. It feels like I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream, that I'm still tied to that post waiting for the noose." Jonas reached over and took her hand, grounding her. "It's real, all of it. The freedom, the safety, the home. It's all real." Mara turned to look at him, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. "Why did you do it? Really? Why did you fight so hard for someone you barely knew?" Jonas thought about that for a moment, about all the reasons he could give. Because his daughters had recognized her, because she'd saved them in a storm, because Rogan's cruelty had offended every fiber of his being. All of those things were true. But underneath it all was something simpler, something he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because when I looked at you in that square," he said slowly, "tied up and beaten, but still standing with your head high, still refusing to break, I saw someone worth fighting for. Someone who deserved better than what this town had decided she deserved. And I thought, maybe if I could help you, maybe if I could give you a chance to prove them all wrong, then maybe there was still some justice left in this world after all." Mara's breath caught. She squeezed his hand tightly, and they rode the rest of the way home in companionable silence, both of them watching the stars wheel overhead, both of them finally able to breathe. When they reached the ranch, Jonas carried both sleeping girls inside while Mara followed on unsteady legs. The house felt different somehow, lighter, as if the truth spoken in that crowded hall had lifted something heavy from the rafters and walls. Jonas tucked Elsie into bed first, brushing golden hair from her forehead, then did the same for Ivy. Both girls stirred slightly, but didn't wake, exhausted by the evening's drama. He found Mara standing in the hallway, staring at nothing, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Without thinking, Jonas stepped close and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest, and he felt the moment she finally let go. Really let go. Her body going soft against his as months of terror and tension drained away. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered against his shirt. "I've spent so long just trying to survive that I don't know how to live anymore." Jonas rested his chin on top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and herbs from the garden, and something uniquely Mara. "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." They stood like that for a long moment, neither wanting to break the spell. Finally, Mara pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes that held questions she seemed afraid to ask. Jonas cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone where the last yellow shadow of a bruise was finally fading. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's a new day. The first day of your actual life, not the one Rogan tried to force you into." Mara nodded and retreated to her room. Jonas stood in the dark hallway for a while longer, listening to the house settle around him, before heading to his own bed. He expected to lie awake for hours, mind churning over everything that had happened, but exhaustion pulled him under almost immediately. For the first time in months, he slept without nightmares. Morning arrived with birdsong and golden light streaming through his window. Jonas dressed and headed downstairs, following the smell of coffee and something baking. He found Mara in the kitchen, already dressed and working on what looked like bread dough, her movements practiced and efficient. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee. "Couldn't sleep past dawn." Mara shaped the dough with quick, capable hands. "Felt wrong to lie in bed when there's work to be done. Besides, I wanted to make something special for when Rowan comes tonight. I haven't cooked for my brother in 4 years." Her voice caught on the last words, and Jonas saw tears threatening. He moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could lean on him if she needed to. "He came all that way to find you," Jonas said. "Spent months digging up evidence, putting together a case. That's not something you do for someone you've given up on." "I told him terrible things the last time we spoke." Mara's hand stilled on the dough. "Accused him of being jealous, of trying to control my life. I chose Thomas over him, chose the man who would eventually try to kill me over the brother who only wanted to protect me. And Rowan still came, still saved me." "That's what family does," Jonas said simply. "They show up, even when it's hard, even when you've pushed them away." Mara looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression made Jonas's breath catch. "Is that what we are?" she asked softly. "Family?" Before Jonas could answer, small footsteps thundered down the stairs and Elsie burst into the kitchen, Ivy right behind her. "Mama, Papa, can we go see the new foal, please?" Elsie begged. One of Jonas's mares had given birth 3 days ago, and the twins had been fascinated by the long-legged baby horse stumbling around the pasture. Mara glanced at Jonas, and he saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The girls had been calling her mama for weeks now, but after last night's public revelation, maybe she wondered if it was still appropriate, if Jonas still wanted her here now that she was no longer a woman who needed rescuing. "After breakfast," Jonas said firmly, answering both the girls' question and Mara's unspoken worry. "Mama needs to finish the bread first, and you two need to eat something besides excitement." Mara's smile was small but genuine. "Go wash up," she told the girls. "I'll have food ready in 10 minutes. They scattered, and Mara returned to her dough with hands that trembled slightly. Jonas wanted to say something more, wanted to tell her that last night had changed nothing about her place here, but the words felt too big for the quiet morning kitchen. So instead, he simply stayed close, refilled her coffee when it went cold, and let his presence say what his voice couldn't quite manage. Breakfast was a chaotic affair, the twins chattering nonstop about the foal and the town meeting, and Uncle Rowan, who they barely remembered but were thrilled to have discovered. After they finished eating, Jonas led them all out to the pasture where the mare grazed with her baby. The foal was all legs and curiosity, prancing up to investigate the humans with fearless enthusiasm. "She's beautiful," Mara breathed, watching the baby nuzzle her mother's side. "What will you call her?" "Haven't decided yet. Jonas leaned against the fence rail, the warm morning sun on his face. Usually let them show me their name over the first few weeks. This one's bold, though, brave. Maybe something like courage or valiant. Or hope, Mara said quietly, because sometimes hope is the bravest thing of all. Jonas turned to look at her and found her watching the foal with an expression of such tender longing that it made his chest ache. Hope it is, he agreed. The girls squealed with delight and immediately began making plans for Hope's future. What tricks they'd teach her, how they'd braid her mane with ribbons, all the adventures they'd have together. Mara laughed at their enthusiasm, and the sound was like water in a desert, precious and life-giving. They spent the morning doing ranch work, falling into the rhythm that had developed over the past weeks. Jonas worked with the horses while Mara tended the garden, and the girls helped by chasing butterflies and making elaborate mud pies. It felt ordinary in the best possible way, not the enforced normalcy of people pretending everything was fine, but the genuine peace of people who'd fought through hell and earned their quiet moments. Around midday, a wagon appeared on the road to the ranch. Jonas tensed instinctively, hand moving toward the rifle he now kept closer than he used to, but Mara touched his arm gently. "It's just townspeople," she said. "Look, they're bringing things." She was right. As the wagon drew closer, Jonas could see it was Martin Cooper from the feed store, and his wagon bed was full of supplies. Sacks of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, jars of preserves. Behind him came 2 more wagons, then 3 more. A whole caravan of Willow Bend residents bearing gifts like wise men following a star. "What in the world?" Jonas muttered. Martin pulled to a stop in front of the house, looking sheepish. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. The ladies organized it, said they wanted to do something to help, to apologize proper-like for how Mrs. Quinn was treated." More people climbed down from wagons, the baker's wife carrying a still-warm pie, the seamstress with packages wrapped in brown paper, families Jonas had known for years, all looking guilty and eager to make amends. Mrs. Quinn, the baker's wife, Helen, Jonas remembered her name was Helen, stepped forward hesitantly. "We brought you some things. For the house. And I made my apple pie, the one everyone says is the best in 3 counties. It's not much, but we wanted you to know how sorry we are. How wrong we were about you." Mara looked overwhelmed, backing up slightly until she was pressed against Jonas's side. He put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You don't have to accept any of this if you don't want to," he murmured in her ear. "You don't owe these people anything." But Mara shook her head slowly. "No, She stepped forward, her voice gaining strength. "Thank you, all of you. This is very kind. More than I expected or probably deserve." "Nonsense," Helen said firmly. "You deserve the truth from the start. We should have listened, should have questioned, should have been better." She glanced at the other women, who nodded in agreement. "We'd like to help make up for that, if you'll let us. Maybe come by once a week, help with chores or mending, or just keep you company. Let you know you're welcome here, that you're one of us now." Jonas felt Mara's shoulder tremble under his hand. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." The women swarmed forward then, gathering Mara up in hugs and exclamations and plans for quilting bees and recipe exchanges. The men unloaded supplies and spoke quietly with Jonas about horses and weather and carefully avoided mentioning anything about sheriffs or trials or accusations. The twins darted between adults like small golden birds, soaking up the attention and treats people kept slipping them. It took hours for everyone to leave, and by the time the last wagon disappeared down the road, the house was overflowing with supplies and goodwill. Mara stood in the parlor, surrounded by fabric and food and kindness, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Jonas said gently, pulling her close. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Mara laughed through her tears. "That's the problem. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for someone to take it all away. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." "No more shoes," Jonas promised. "No more waiting for disaster. This is real, Mara. This is yours, your home." She buried her face against his shoulder and cried, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Jonas just held her and let her release months of fear and pain and desperate hope finally fulfilled. Behind them, the twins crept into the room and wrapped their arms around both adults. creating a tangle of limbs and love that felt like the safest place in the world. Evening arrived too quickly. Jonas spent the afternoon cleaning himself up, aware that meeting Mara's brother properly was important, even if they'd technically already met in the chaos of the town hall. Mara disappeared into the kitchen and emerged hours later with a feast: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a berry pie that made the whole house smell like heaven. Rowan arrived precisely at 6, riding a sturdy bay gelding and carrying a bottle of what looked like expensive whiskey. He'd cleaned up, too, Jonas noticed, traded his travel-worn coat for something newer, combed his graying hair back from his weathered face. But his eyes were the same as Mara's, deep brown and intelligent, seeing more than they let on. "Mr. Kincaid," Rowan said, extending a hand, "thank you for the invitation and for everything you've done for my sister." "Jonas," he corrected, shaking firmly, "and I didn't do anything she wouldn't have done for someone else. Your sister's got more courage in her little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." Rowan's expression softened. "She always did. Even as a little girl, she was the brave one. I was the one who overthought everything, analyzed every angle. Mara just jumped in feet first and trusted she'd figure it out." "Some things don't change," Mara said dryly, appearing in the doorway. She'd changed into one of the new dresses the town's women had brought, soft blue cotton that made her eyes look darker, deeper. Her hair was loose around her shoulders for once, no longer scraped back in a severe bun. She looked younger suddenly, less like a woman who'd survived hell, and more like the girl she must have been before life got hard. Rowan crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into a crushing hug. "God, Mara, I thought I'd lost you. When I heard about Thomas, when I couldn't find you anywhere, I thought—" "I'm okay," Mara said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I'm here. I'm safe. Thanks to you." "Thanks to him," Rowan corrected, nodding at Jonas. "I just brought the evidence. He's the one who stood up to Rogan, who protected you when everyone else wanted to throw you to the wolves." The twins chose that moment to thunder in from the yard, skidding to a stop when they saw the strange man hugging Mara. "Who's that?" Ivy demanded suspiciously. "This is your Uncle Rowan," Mara said, pulling back to wipe her eyes. "My brother. He's the one who helped save us last night." "Thank you for saving Mama," Elsie said solemnly, walking up to shake Rowan's hand like a miniature adult. "We were very scared." Rowan crouched down to her level, his stern face breaking into a smile. "You're welcome. And thank you for taking care of my sister. She wrote me once, years ago, about 2 little girls she found in a snowstorm. She didn't think she'd saved them, thought the cold had made her imagine it. I'm glad to see she was wrong." "She saved us," Ivy confirmed. "And we saved her back. That's how family works." Something in Rowan's expression cracked. He looked up at Mara, then at Jonas, then back at the twins. "Yes," he said roughly. "Yes, that's exactly how family works." Dinner was a lively affair, full of stories and laughter and the slow rebuilding of connections too long severed. Rowan told them about his work as a journalist, about the stories he'd covered and the places he'd been. The twins were fascinated, demanding to know if he'd ever met any outlaws or seen any gunfights. Mara talked about her life before Thomas, about growing up with Rowan, about their parents, and the small farm they'd worked until sickness took their mother and fire took their father. "We only had each other after that," Mara said quietly. "2 kids trying to survive in a world that didn't care if we lived or died. Rowan worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, put himself through school at night while working at the newspaper during the day. Everything I am, everything I know, I learned from him." "And you still chose Thomas Quinn," Rowan said, but there was no judgment in his voice now, just sadness. "I should have tried harder to stop you, should have made you see what he really was." "I wouldn't have listened," Mara admitted. "I was 22 and stupid and convinced I knew better than my overprotective older brother. You couldn't have stopped me. I had to learn that lesson on my own. Nearly got you killed." But it didn't. Mara reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm here. I survived. And maybe I had to go through all of it to end up here, in this place, with this family. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes." Rowan looked at Jonas, something complicated passing across his face. "You going to marry her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mara choked on her wine. The twins perked up, suddenly very interested. Jonas felt his face heat. "Rowan," Mara gasped. "You can't just... That's not... We haven't even..." "It's a reasonable question," Rowan said calmly. "You're living in his house, caring for his children, being called mama by those girls. People are going to talk, Mara. They're going to make assumptions. And after everything you've been through, after Rogan tried to use your marital status against you, I think it's important to clarify what your situation is here." Jonas cleared his throat. "With respect, Rowan, Mara's situation is that she's safe and she's family, and nobody gets to question that or make demands about what it should look like. If people want to gossip, let them. We know the truth." "And what is the truth?" Rowan pressed. "I'm not trying to be difficult, Jonas. I'm trying to protect my sister. She's been through hell. The last thing she needs is more scandal or speculation or people treating her like something shameful." "Nobody's treating anyone like anything shameful," Jonas said, fighting to keep his voice level. "Your sister lives here because she saved my daughter's lives and because she deserves a home. What happens beyond that is between us and nobody else's business." Mara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." She walked out before anyone could stop her. Rowan sighed and scrubbed a hand over his face. "I handled that badly." "You think?" Jonas shot back, but there was no real heat in it. He understood what Rowan was trying to do, understood the protective instinct driving the questions. "Look, I get that you're worried about her, but Mara doesn't need you or me or anyone else deciding what her life should look like. She spent too long having other people make those choices for her." "Fair enough." Rowan stood. "I should apologize, make sure she knows I wasn't trying to push her into anything, just looking out for her," Jonas finished. "I know. But maybe let me talk to her first? As a neutral party?" Rowan hesitated, then nodded. "The girls and I will clean up dinner. You go find my sister and tell her I'm an idiot." Jonas found Mara in the barn, sitting on a hay bale in the growing darkness, watching Hope and her mother through the stall bars. She didn't look up when he approached, just kept staring at the horses like they held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "He means well," Jonas said, settling onto the hay bale beside her. "I know." Mara's voice was thick. "That's what makes it worse. He's right. People will talk. People will assume things about us, about why I'm here, about what we are to each other. And after everything that happened with Rogan, after how he tried to force me into..." She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't want anyone thinking I'm with you because I have to be, because I owe you, because I have nowhere else to go." "Is that why you're here?" Jonas asked quietly. "Because you have nowhere else?" Mara finally looked at him, and in the dim light of the barn, her eyes were luminous with unshed tears. "No. I'm here because when I'm here, I don't feel broken anymore. I'm here because your daughters look at me like I hung the moon, and for the first time in years, I feel like maybe I'm worth something. I'm here because you..." Her voice cracked. "Because you make me feel safe, and I haven't felt safe since before I married Thomas." Jonas's heart hammered in his chest. "Mara, but I can't be with you out of gratitude," she continued, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. "I can't let you marry me because you feel responsible for me, or because the town expects it, or because it would make things easier. I've been that woman before, the one who chose security over everything else, and look where it got me. I can't do it again, even for you. Especially for you." "What if it wasn't about gratitude?" Jonas heard himself say. "What if it was about choosing each other because we want to, not because we have to?" Mara stared at him. "What are you saying?" Jonas took a breath, trying to find words for feelings he'd been carefully not examining for weeks. "I'm saying that when I saw you in that square, something in me recognized something in you. I'm saying that these past weeks, watching you with my daughters, watching you come alive again, watching you fight your way back from everything Rogan tried to do to you, it's changed something in me. I'm saying I went to that town meeting ready to fight the whole damn territory for you, not because I had to, but because the thought of losing you felt like losing a piece of myself I didn't know I was missing." "Jonas," Mara whispered. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Jonas said quickly. "I'm not asking you for anything you're not ready to give, but I'm telling you that if you stay here, if you choose to make this your home, it won't be out of charity or obligation. It'll be because I want you here, because my daughters want you here, Because you're already family in every way that matters. And maybe someday, if you wanted, we could make it official, but only if that's what you want too. Mara's tears finally spilled over. I don't know what I want yet. I don't know who I am without fear and survival and fighting. I don't know how to just be a person again, let alone someone's wife. Then don't be anyone's wife, Jonas said simply. Just be Mara. Just be yourself, here, with us. Figure out who you are without all the rest of it. And maybe somewhere down the line, after you've had time to heal and breathe and discover what you want from life instead of just what you need to survive, maybe then we can talk about the rest. And if what I discover is that I need to leave, Mara asked, her voice small and frightened. If I figure out that I can't do this, can't be what you and the girls need, then you leave knowing you'll always have a home to come back to, Jonas said. And knowing that whatever you choose, whoever you decide to be, you'll still be family. Still be the woman who saved my daughters and let them save her back. That doesn't change, Mara. Nothing changes that. Mara made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You're too good to be real, you know that? No man is this understanding, this patient. I'm not patient, Jonas admitted. I'm terrified. Terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize you can do better than a horse rancher with 2 kids and a quiet life in the middle of nowhere. Terrified that I'll say or do the wrong thing and you'll disappear like smoke. But I'm also old enough to know that trying to hold on to someone who wants to leave is like trying to hold water. It just slips through your fingers faster. So yeah, I'm telling you that you're free to go if that's what you need. Because the only way you can really stay is if you choose it freely. Mara reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Her hands were rough from work, scarred from survival, but they fit perfectly in his. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need time, Jonas. Time to figure out who I am when I'm not scared. Time to learn how to be loved instead of needed. Take all the time you need, Jonas said, squeezing her hand. We're not going anywhere either. They sat like that for a while, hands linked in the darkness, watching the horses sleep and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Mara stood and pulled Jonas to his feet. We should go back inside, she said. I need to tell Rowan he's an interfering busybody, but I love him anyway. Jonas laughed. That should go over well. He's my brother. He's used to me calling him worse. They walked back to the house together, still holding hands, and found Rowan and the twins in the parlor. The girls had somehow convinced their uncle to read them 3 different stories and were now trying to negotiate a 4th. Rowan looked relieved when he saw them, his eyes going to their joined hands and something in his expression easing. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I was out of line. Your life is your own, Mara. I worry. I know you do. Mara crossed to him and kissed his cheek. And I love you for it. But Jonas is right. I need to figure things out on my own terms, in my own time. Can you accept that? I can try, Rowan said, though I reserve the right to threaten him if he hurts you. Fair enough, Jonas said easily. I'd do the same if our positions were reversed. The evening ended with Rowan promising to visit again before heading back to Denver, the twins extracting promises of letters and stories about his adventures, and Mara looking more peaceful than Jonas had ever seen her. After Rowan left and the girls were tucked in bed, Jonas found himself in the barn again, this time doing the evening chores he'd neglected during dinner. He was checking Hope's mother when he heard footsteps behind him. Mara appeared carrying a lantern, still wearing the blue dress that made her look like something out of a dream. Couldn't sleep? Jonas asked. Didn't want to, Mara corrected. She set the lantern down and came to stand beside him, reaching out to stroke the mare's soft nose. I kept thinking about what you said, about choosing each other freely. And I realized something. Mara turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. I've been so focused on not repeating the past, on not choosing security over everything else, that I almost missed what was right in front of me. This isn't about security, Jonas. This isn't about having nowhere else to go. This is about wanting to be here, with you and the girls. About choosing this life not because I have to, but because it's the first time in years I felt like I was living instead of just surviving. Jonas's breath caught. Mara, I'm not saying I'm ready for everything right now, she interrupted. I'm still figuring out who I am, still learning how to trust that this is real and permanent and won't be ripped away. But I am saying that I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. And maybe that's enough for now." "It's more than enough," Jonas said roughly. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "It's everything." And then, because words suddenly felt insufficient, because the look in her eyes was asking a question he desperately wanted to answer, Jonas kissed her. Soft at first, gentle, giving her time to pull away if this wasn't what she wanted. But Mara made a small sound and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with a hunger that spoke of months of touch starvation, years of being handled roughly instead of held tenderly. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. We can do this. We can figure this out." "One day at a time," Jonas agreed. "One day at a time," Mara echoed. They stood like that in the quiet barn, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and horses, holding each other in the lamplight. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead and the world kept turning. But in that moment, in that space they'd carved out together, time seemed to slow and stretch and become something precious. Neither of them noticed the small figure watching from the barn door, Ivy, who'd crept out of bed to find her papa, and instead discovered something that made her smile wider than Christmas morning. She tiptoed back to the house and climbed into bed with Elsie, whispering the news in her sister's ear. "Papa kissed Mama," she breathed. "Good," Elsie mumbled sleepily. "About time." And in the morning, when Jonas came down to find Mara already in the kitchen making breakfast, when the girls bounced in chattering about dreams and horses and the beautiful day outside, when Rowan stopped by on his way out of town to say goodbye with promises to return soon, in that morning light, everything felt possible. Jonas caught Mara's eye across the kitchen table and saw her smile, small and secret and just for him. Outside, the world was waking up. Inside, they were already home. The seasons changed the way they always did in that part of the country, suddenly and without apology. Summer heat gave way to autumn's gold, and the ranch transformed into something out of a painting. The cottonwoods along the creek turned brilliant yellow, and the air took on that crisp quality that made everything feel sharper, clearer, more real. Mara had been with them 4 months now, and the ranch bore the marks of her presence everywhere. The garden she'd planted overflowed with vegetables they were preserving for winter. Curtains she'd sewn hung in every window, cheerful calico that caught the morning light. The twins' clothes no longer had holes or loose buttons, and the house smelled constantly of bread and herbs and the lavender she hung in bunches to dry. But it was the smaller changes that struck Jonas most. The way Mara sang while she worked, no longer afraid to make noise. The way she laughed freely now, head thrown back, eyes crinkled at the corners. The way she'd stopped flinching every time someone approached her quickly, stopped checking over her shoulder like she expected Rogan to materialize from thin air. Rogan was gone, of course. The trial had been swift. The evidence Rowan brought was damning, and once people started talking, stories poured out about the sheriff's corruption, his brutality, his abuse of power. He'd been sentenced to hang, but something had happened in transport to the territorial prison. Rogan had tried to escape and been shot by his own former deputy. Jonas felt no satisfaction at the news, just a weary relief that the man could hurt no one else ever again. The town had embraced Mara with an enthusiasm that bordered on aggressive. Every week brought new visitors, new invitations to socials and quilting bees and church suppers. The women who'd once crossed the street to avoid her now competed for her attention. As if being friends with the woman they'd condemned somehow absolved them of guilt, Mara handled it with grace Jonas could only admire, accepting their offerings without quite forgiving their original judgment. "They mean well," she told him one evening after Helen had dropped off yet another pie. "And I suppose I can't blame them for believing what they were told. Rogan was convincing. I might have believed him too if I'd been in their position." "You're more charitable than I am," Jonas said. "I remember who brought food when Sarah died. I remember who helped search for the girls in that blizzard. And I remember who turned their backs when you needed them most." "Memory's a funny thing," Mara mused. "Some things we should hold on to. Others we need to let go, or they'll poison everything good we're trying to build." She was right, of course. She usually was. Jonas had learned to trust her wisdom, the hard-earned kind that came from surviving things that should have broken her. She saw the world clearly now, without the rose-colored glasses she'd worn when she married Thomas, but also without the bitter cynicism that trauma could breed. She'd found some middle ground between innocence and despair, and she lived there with a quiet strength that took his breath away. The kiss in the barn had changed things between them, though not in the dramatic way Jonas had feared. They didn't suddenly become a courting couple, didn't start making grand romantic gestures or declarations. Instead, their relationship deepened in small ways. A hand on the small of her back as he passed her in the kitchen, her fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee, stolen moments of conversation after the girls went to bed, sitting close on the porch and watching the stars wheel overhead. The twins, of course, had opinions about the situation. "When are you going to marry Mama?" Ivy demanded one morning at breakfast, with all the subtlety of a 6-year-old who'd decided something needed to happen. Jonas nearly choked on his coffee. Mara's face flushed pink, but she didn't look displeased, just embarrassed. "That's a decision grown-ups make together, sweetheart," Jonas said carefully. "Not something that happens just because children think it should." "But you love her, don't you?" Elsie pressed. "And she loves you, we can tell. You smile at each other all funny." "We do not smile funny," Mara protested, fighting back a laugh. "Do too," both girls insisted in unison. Jonas caught Mara's eye across the table and saw his own amusement reflected there. "Eat your breakfast," he said firmly, "and stop trying to arrange my love life." "Someone has to," Ivy muttered into her porridge. "You're taking forever." Later, after the girls had scattered to do their morning chores, Mara found Jonas in the barn. He was working on repairing a saddle, the leather smooth and familiar under his hands. She leaned against the stall door, watching him work with an expression he couldn't quite read. "They're not wrong, you know," she said finally. "About the smiling." Jonas set down his tools. "No, I suppose they're not." "I've been thinking," Mara continued, her voice careful, measured, "about what we talked about that night. About choosing each other freely. About taking time to figure out who I am without fear driving every decision." Jonas's heart picked up speed, but he kept his hand steady on the leather. And I think I've figured some things out." Mara pushed off from the door and crossed to him, close enough that he could smell the herbs from the garden clinging to her dress. "I'm not the same woman who married Thomas Quinn. I'm not even the same woman who stood tied to that post 4 months ago, too angry to be scared. I'm someone new. Someone I'm still getting to know, but someone I actually like. Someone who's strong enough to choose what she wants instead of just accepting what she's offered." "Mara, let me finish," she said softly. "I need to say this while I have the courage. The truth is, Jonas Kincaid, I love you. Not because you saved me, not because you gave me a home, not because I'm grateful or obligated or have nowhere else to go. I love you because you're kind without being weak, because you're strong without being cruel, because you listen when I talk and trust me to know my own mind. I love you because when I'm with you, I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm just me, and that's enough." Jonas's throat went tight. He reached out and pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "You're more than enough," he said roughly. "You're everything. And I love you too, the woman you were, the woman you are, the woman you're still becoming. All of it, all of you." They stood like that for a long moment, breathing each other's air, hearts beating in tandem. Then Mara pulled back slightly, a smile playing at her lips. "So I've been thinking we should probably do something about this situation," she said, "before the twins stage an intervention." Jonas laughed. "What did you have in mind?" "Marry me," Mara said simply. "Not because anyone expects it, not because it's the proper thing to do. Marry me because I choose you and you choose me, and those 2 little girls deserve to know that the family we've built is real and permanent and no one can take it away." Jonas felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since Sarah died, since he'd learned how quickly love could be stolen by cruel fate. "Are you sure?" "There's no rush, Mara. We can take all the time you need." "I'm sure," Mara said, and her voice was steady, certain. "I spent 3 years in a marriage where I felt trapped. I know the difference between choosing something freely and feeling forced into it. This is free. This is choice. This is me saying I want to spend the rest of my life on this ranch, with you and those girls, building something good out of all the broken pieces we've survived. Then yes, Jonas said, pulling her tight against him. Yes, I'll marry you. 1,000 times yes. Mara laughed and kissed him, and it tasted like joy and relief and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. The girls are going to be insufferable, Jonas observed. They'll claim credit for this forever. Let them, Mara said. They're not entirely wrong. If they hadn't recognized me in that square, if they hadn't insisted you choose me, none of this would have happened. Maybe 6-year-olds make better matchmakers than adults give them credit for. They told the twins that evening over dinner. Jonas had planned a whole speech about love and family and new beginnings, but before he could get 2 words out, Ivy shouted, "Finally!" so loudly she startled the cat off the windowsill. About time, Elsie agreed, nodding sagely. We were starting to think you'd never figure it out. You two are menaces, Mara said, but she was laughing, gathering both girls into her arms. Absolute menaces. But you love us anyway, Ivy said confidently. More than anything in this world, Mara agreed. They were married 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the autumn sky was so blue it hurt to look at directly. Not in the church with half the town gawking, but on the ranch, under the cottonwoods by the creek, with just the people who mattered most. Rowan came, taking a leave from his newspaper to give his sister away. Helen and Martin came as witnesses, representing the town's genuine goodwill. The circuit preacher who served the territory happened to be passing through and agreed to perform the ceremony. And Elsie and Ivy, dressed in new white dresses and carrying wildflowers, served as witnesses and flower girls and general sources of chaos. Mara wore a dress she'd made herself, simple ivory cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing fancy, but she looked radiant in it. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she'd woven small yellow flowers through it. She looked young and beautiful and happy in a way that made Jonas's chest ache with the fierce protectiveness he felt for this woman who'd survived so much. Jonas wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to his first wedding, and if that bothered him, he couldn't tell. This felt different from marrying Sarah. Not better or worse, just different. Sarah had been his first love, sweet and gentle, and taken too soon. Mara was his second chance, hard-won, and chosen with full knowledge of how precious and fragile love could be. The ceremony was simple. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the sanctity of family. Rowan looked suspiciously misty-eyed as he placed Mara's hand in Jonas's. The twins whispered commentary throughout, loudly enough that everyone could hear them debating whether Papa would cry. When it came time for the vows, Jonas looked into Mara's eyes and spoke from the heart. "I promise to choose you every day," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "To listen when you speak, to trust you to know your own mind, to never try to control or diminish you. I promise to be your partner, not your keeper, to love you in the hard times as much as the easy ones, and I promise that this home, this family, will always be a safe place for you to be exactly who you are." Mara's eyes shimmered with tears. When she spoke, her voice was strong despite them. "I promise to let myself be loved," she said, "to stop waiting for disaster and start trusting in good things. I promise to be honest with you, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared. I promise to love your daughters like they're my own, because in every way that matters, they are. And I promise to keep choosing this life, this love, this family, every single day for the rest of my life." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Jonas kissed his bride, the twins cheered so loudly that birds exploded from the cottonwoods in a flutter of wings and indignation. The celebration afterward was modest but perfect. Helen had brought food, Martin contributed whiskey from his private stock, and someone had set up a fiddle and played dancing music while the afternoon sun slanted golden through the trees. The twins danced with anyone who'd hold their hands, spinning and laughing until they collapsed dizzy in the grass. Rowan pulled his sister aside for a private moment, and Jonas saw them embrace, saw Rowan whisper something that made Mara cry and laugh at the same time. As evening approached and their guests began to leave, Jonas found himself standing with Mara on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Her hand was warm in his, her wedding ring, a simple gold band he'd bought in town, catching the fading light. No regrets? He asked quietly. Not even one, Mara said. She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek. You gave me my life back, Jonas. Not just in that square when you cut me down, but every day since. You gave me a home, a family, a future I thought I'd lost forever. How could I possibly regret that? You gave us just as much, Jonas said. This house was dying before you came. We were all just going through the motions, surviving instead of living. You brought us back to life, Mara. You made us whole again. Inside, they could hear the twins getting ready for bed, their voices high and excited, arguing about who got to sleep where, now that Mama was officially Mama. Mara laughed at the sound. I should probably go settle that debate before they tear the house apart. In a minute, Jonas said, pulling her close. Let them work it out themselves. I want one more moment of just us before we go back to being parents. Mara relaxed into his embrace, her head resting on his shoulder. And they stood like that as the stars began to emerge, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. The months that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, like they'd been doing this dance forever. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale. The twins built snowmen and had elaborate snowball fights and taught Mara to ice skate on the frozen pond. One night, after a particularly heavy snowfall, Mara woke from a dream with tears streaming down her face. Jonas held her while she cried, not asking questions, just offering comfort. Finally, she spoke, her voice muffled against his chest. I dreamed about that night, the night I found them in the snow. Only this time, in the dream, I remembered all of it. Remembered how cold I was, how scared. Remembered thinking I was going to die there with them, that all three of us would freeze together. And then I remembered the moment I decided I didn't care, as long as they survived. As long as two little girls I didn't even know got to live, it would be worth it. Jonas pressed his face into her hair. You gave everything to save them. And they gave everything back, Mara whispered. They saved me too, Jonas. When you cut me down from that post, when they said that's her, they gave me my life back. They gave me a reason to keep fighting. I owed them a debt I could never repay, and instead they made me their mother. How is that even possible? Maybe that's just what love does, Jonas said softly. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't demand repayment. It just gives and trusts that somehow it'll all balance out in the end. Mara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to tell them, when they're old enough to understand. I want them to know the whole story, not just that I saved them, but that they saved me right back. That we're bound together by something bigger than blood or law or any name people put on it. We're family because we chose each other, all of us, even when choosing was the hardest thing in the world. We'll tell them, Jonas promised. When the time is right, we'll tell them everything. Spring came, and with it, new life. Hope, the foal born the spring Mara arrived, had grown into a beautiful yearling, all legs and curiosity and fearless energy. The twins were learning to ride on one of the gentler mares, and Mara discovered she had a natural way with horses that rivaled Jonas's own. One warm April morning, Jonas was working in the barn when Mara found him. She had a strange expression on her face, excited and scared and glowing all at once. Jonas, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I need to tell you something. He straightened immediately, reading her tone. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Mara took his hands, pressing them flat against her still flat stomach. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. Jonas's mind went blank. Then it flooded with 1,000 thoughts at once. Joy and terror and wonder and fear all tangled together until he couldn't separate one from another. A baby. Their baby. Proof that life continued, that good things could still grow from the ashes of tragedy. You're sure? He asked hoarsely. I'm sure. 3 months along, I think. I wasn't certain at first, thought maybe it was just stress or my body still recovering from everything. But Jonas, her eyes filled with tears, we made something new together, something that's ours, that's good, that's proof we survived and we're living, not just existing. Jonas pulled her into his arms and held her while they both cried. Happy tears this time. Tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. When the twins found them like that and demanded to know what was wrong, Mara told them they were going to be big sisters, and the squeals of delight could probably be heard in town. The pregnancy was easy, almost suspiciously so after all the hardship that had come before. Mara bloomed like the garden she tended, growing round and healthy and more beautiful every day. The townswomen brought gifts and advice. The twins talked endlessly to their future sibling through Mara's growing belly, and Jonas found himself terrified and thrilled in equal measure. The baby came in late autumn, almost exactly a year after Jonas and Mara had married. A boy this time, with dark hair like his mother and his father's gray eyes. They named him Rowan Thomas Kincaid, Rowan for the brother who'd saved his mother, Thomas to reclaim the name from tragedy and give it new meaning. Mara held her son and wept, but this time the tears were pure joy. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered, tracing the baby's tiny features with one finger. "After everything with Thomas, after the cell and the accusations and the post, I thought I'd lost my chance at this kind of happiness. I thought I'd die without ever knowing what it felt like to hold my own child." "You have it now, Dad," Jonas said, sitting beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders. "You have all of it. Family, home, love, future. It's all yours, Mara. Nobody can take it away." The twins adored their baby brother with a ferocity that was both touching and slightly alarming. They wanted to help with everything, feeding, changing, rocking him to sleep. They sang him the old melody Mara had sung to them in the snow, passing down the legacy of love and survival to the next generation. One evening when Rowan was 3 months old, sleeping peacefully in his cradle by the fire, Mara found Jonas on the porch. The winter stars were brilliant overhead, the air cold and clean and sharp. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and settled into the chair beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Jonas considered the question. What was he thinking about? The strange path that had brought them here, maybe. The series of small miracles and terrible tragedies that had woven together to create this moment. The way life never turned out the way you expected, but sometimes, just sometimes, it turned out better. "I'm thinking about that day in the town square," he said finally. "About watching you stand there with your head held high, refusing to break even when everyone had decided you were guilty. And I'm thinking about how my daughter said, 'That's her,' with such absolute certainty, like they could see something the rest of us were missing. And I'm thinking about how close I came to not listening, to just getting my supplies and going home and letting someone else deal with Rogan's cruelty." Mara took his hand. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. And everything changed because of it. Everything good in my life right now. You, this family we've built, the way this house feels alive again, all of it came from one moment of listening to 2 6-year-old girls who saw something true when everyone else saw lies." "They saw me," Mara said simply. "Not the accused murderer, not the woman everyone had decided was guilty. They saw the person who'd saved them, and they saved me right back. Maybe that's what family does, sees each other clearly, even when the rest of the world is blind." Inside, baby Rowan made a small sound. Through the window, Jonas could see Elsie get up from where she'd been reading by the fire and go to rock the cradle, singing softly. Ivy joined her. Both girls bent over their brother with expressions of fierce love and protection. "They once called you guilty," Jonas said, echoing words he'd spoken to himself 1,000 times. "But they called you Mama first. They called you family before anyone else saw the truth. And they were right." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "In a land where law twisted truth, a man listened to his daughters," she murmured. "And a woman reclaimed her name. And 2 little girls rebuilt a home from the ashes of a storm." They sat like that as the stars wheeled overhead and the temperature dropped and the first snow of the season began to fall, soft, gentle flakes that caught the light from the house windows and turned the world into something magical. Inside, the twins continued their vigil over their baby brother. The house glowed warm and golden against the dark night. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of the stew Mara had made for dinner. This was home, Jonas thought. Not the structure or the land, though both were important, but this feeling of people choosing each other despite everything, of love that survived judgment and cruelty and despair. This sense of having fought through hell and emerged on the other side with something precious cradled carefully in bloodied but unbroken hands. Years later, when Rowan was 10 and the twins were 16 and beautiful and ready to take on the world, Mara would stand in that town square again. But this time she'd stand beside Jonas as they watched their son run through the market with his friends, laughing and carefree and loved. She'd stand there and remember the woman she'd been, broken, accused, tied to a post and offered up like livestock to anyone desperate enough to take her. And she'd remember the moment everything changed. Two small voices saying, "Papa, that's her." One man walking through a hostile crowd to cut her down. The slow, terrifying process of learning to trust again, to love again, to live again instead of just survive. The town square would still have that post, but now it had a plaque beside it. The town council had put it up after Rogan's conviction, a memorial to all the women he'd hurt and a promise to do better. Mara had been asked to say a few words at the dedication, and her hands had shaken as she'd stood before the crowd. Some of the same people who'd jeered at her, but many who'd genuinely changed, who'd learned from their complicity in Rogan's cruelty. "We all have choices," she'd said that day, her voice carrying across the square. "Every day, we choose who to believe, who to help, who to condemn. We choose whether to ask questions or accept easy answers. We choose whether to stand up for what's right or look away because it's easier, and those choices matter. They shape who we are and what kind of world we build for our children." She'd looked at Jonas then, at their children standing beside him, at Rowan who'd come from Denver for the occasion. "I was saved by people who chose to listen instead of judge, who chose compassion over cruelty, who chose to believe that truth matters more than convenience. And that changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us." But that was still years away. Tonight, in the present moment, Jonas and Mara sat on their porch and watched the snow fall. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. The horses were settled in the barn. The garden lay dormant under the snow, waiting for spring to wake it again. "Tell me the story," Jonas said suddenly, "the one your mother used to sing, about the stars and the river." Mara smiled and began to sing, her voice soft and sweet in the cold night air. It was an old melody passed down through generations, about a traveler lost in the dark who followed the stars home, about a river that carried them safely through danger, about finding light in the darkest places and holding on to hope when everything else was gone. Jonas closed his eyes and listened, and he could see it all. The night in the storm when Mara had sung this same song to two freezing children, giving them her warmth and her hope even as she felt her own life slipping away. The countless nights since when she'd sung it to comfort nightmares, to celebrate joy, to simply fill the silence with beauty. And all the nights to come when this melody would echo through their home, teaching new generations about courage and sacrifice and the kind of love that chooses to give everything without expecting anything in return. When the song ended, Mara stood and held out her hand. "Come to bed, Jonas Kincaid. We've got an early morning tomorrow." Jonas took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They went inside together, checking on each child one last time before retiring to their own room. As Jonas drifted off to sleep with Mara warm beside him, he thought about the impossibility of their story. How a condemned woman and a grieving widower and two perceptive little girls had somehow found each other and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate tragedies. They'd once been broken people existing in broken lives, just trying to survive one day at a time. But survival wasn't enough anymore. They'd learned to live again, to love again, to hope again. They'd learned that family wasn't about blood or law or what other people expected. It was about choosing each other every single day, even when that choice was hard, even when the world said it was wrong. Their story ended not in the town square where judgment had screamed and cruelty had worn a badge, and three women had stood tied to posts waiting for mercy that never came. It ended here, in this quiet ranch house under a dark sky full of stars, where every heartbeat answered the same word over and over like a prayer, like a promise, like the truest thing any of them had ever known. Home. They were home, and they were, finally and completely and irrevocably, free.